Jasper, Texas, Laramie, Wyoming. Now these are names that remind us of cruelty, of pent-up anger, and now of simmering grudges that won't go away anytime soon. Can those crimes be forgiven? Buried in the police books is another older case that was 7 times worse. Is there something right now that you're having a hard time forgiving? That's okay. We all sometimes have to struggle with the temptation to play with and caress a certain mental list. I'd like to give you both the long form and the short form of what Vera Sinton suggests are some of the main things a victim might legitimately have a grudge about. Here's her list of 7 hard things that would be agony to forgive. And attached are 1 or 2 snapshot illustrations of each. Things hard to forgive. Number 1. An injustice carried out for cynical political ends. Older Americans' reactions might go back decades ago to poor Michael Dukakis, whose presidential campaign was upended by the famous, nasty, and untrue Willie Horton ad. On his deathbed, political operative Lee Atwater confessed to some regret for the unfairness of that racist attack ad. Historians will remember that a certain Alexander Hamilton didn't just get his feelings hurt over a political discussion. Vice President Aaron Burr actually shot and killed Hamilton in a duel clear back in 1804. Compared to Mr. Hamilton, I'd say Dukakis got off rather lightly. But here's number 2. The jealous destruction of a man because of his good influence over others. A name like Martin Luther King Jr. or Mohandas Gandhi immediately comes to mind. How about this one, number 3? Being betrayed for money by someone you trusted. You'll understand that a Christian preacher goes right away to that great old Bible story about Joseph, who was sold by his brothers. And maybe in the realm of fiction and Hollywood, we think of perhaps Michael Corleone, whose trusted lieutenant, the Caporigi Tessio, betrayed his boss to the Barzini family. Well, that's not such a good example because everyone in that story was backstabbing everybody else. The Godfather's laundry was dirtier than anybody's. But the illustration of selling out for cash is still there. Here's a hard one. Vera's number 4 reason. Desertion by a close companion at the moment of danger. Denying all knowledge of you. Maybe you've read the marvelous book from World War II, one of my favorites, entitled Flee the Captor, where a young Christian named John Widener helped more than 1,000 refugees escape from the Nazis. But there's a story in that book about a man named Joseph Smith who liquidated his family's entire fortune and gave it to one of those passers, a man skilled in the so-called underground routes out of Germany and occupied France. Things were going just great until right at the crucial juncture, with the most difficult barbed wire checkpoints just ahead and Gestapo gendarmes everywhere, all of a sudden this passer was gone, checked out, and with all of Joseph Smith's money with him. Fortunately, Widener, as a dedicated Christian, stepped in and arranged, using his own funds and risking his own life, to help the family get across the border to Switzerland. But imagine that empty feeling, helpless anger, no money, no food, no friends, and the person who had promised to stay with you and help you, gone. Well, here's number 5 in Vera Sinton's list of legitimate grudges. And remember that her book has this title, How Can I Forgive? Can you relate to this one? beating someone up for a bit of fun. And here in America, we think in shame about men like James Byrd Jr. and Matthew Shepard, who were both tortured and killed because they were different. Imagine the struggles the parents and relatives have been having even now, trying to resolve their anger, trying to give God the deep hurt in their hearts. Number 6, allowing an innocent man to be sentenced to death. In many countries, as well as right here in the USA, we have a rash of death row reversals and police scandals as it's discovered that witnesses have lied and law enforcement officials have manufactured evidence. In Illinois, they suspended the death sentence after finding out that they had had 12 executions and 13 capital convictions overturned. We aren't even batting 500, said Governor George Ryan in announcing the moratorium. But imagine the anger if someone were to knowingly and deliberately and willfully allow a wrong conviction to stand, and it was your son they strapped down to a lethal injection gurney. Now, the final point on Vera's checklist, number 7. Standing and jeering at a person in excruciating pain. And going back to number 5, we could put on the top of this wanted poster Russell Henderson and Aaron McKinley from the Laramie hanging. And then the trio of thugs from Jasper, Texas, Lawrence Brewer, John William King, and Sean Allen Barry, who dragged a man behind a pickup truck and laughed as they watched him die. And of course, down through the sad pages of human history, we have men like the infamous Joseph Mengele, the doctor whose horrific deeds are chronicled in The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Mengele devised experiments which he did on Jewish prisoners, intentionally watching impassively, in fact taking notes as men and women were subjected to the cruelest kinds of torture, measuring how fast a man will freeze to death, for instance. And again we ask, as we think about this list, how could you forgive if you or someone you loved had endured even one of these 7 unbelievable atrocities? How could you give such a thing to God? How could the words, Father, forgive them, possibly have any meaning? Well, we can go right down that whole list of 7 outrages, 7 forgiveness blockers. And notice that it's Jesus, more than anyone, who endured not only one, but all 7 of these hurts. Here's Sinton's list of shame again. 1, injustice carried out for cynical political ends. That's Jesus, certainly. Number 2, the jealous destruction of a man because of his good influence over others. That's precisely why the Pharisees and Sadducees were so angry with Jesus. Number 3, being betrayed for money by someone you trusted. Do the initials J.I. for Judas Iscariot ring any bells? Number 4, desertion by a close companion at the moment of danger, denying all knowledge of you. And of course, what Peter did to Jesus 3 times before the rooster crowed almost defines the word denial, doesn't it? 5, beating someone up for a bit of fun. Here's the court transcription from Luke 23, 63 and 64, according to the Message paraphrase. The men in charge of Jesus began poking fun at him, slapping him around. They put a blindfold on him and taunted, "Who hit you that time?" They were having a grand time with him. Does that sound like shades of Jasper, Texas? On to number 6. Allowing an innocent man to be sentenced to one of the cruelest deaths ever devised. That's precisely what Pontius Pilate did. washing his hands in that basin saying, "Don't blame me." And yet he had to sign off on the DOE, the date of execution official order. And finally, number 7, standing and jeering at a person in excruciating pain. Around the cross on that Friday afternoon, the vendors sold soda and Cracker Jack as the crowds hooted at Jesus up on the cross. Luke 23, verses 35 to 37. The people stood there staring at Jesus, and the ringleaders made faces, taunting, "He saved others, let's see him save himself. The Messiah of God, ha! The chosen, ha!" The soldiers also came up and poked fun at him, making a game of it. They toasted him with sour wine. "So, you're king of the Jews? Save yourself. If you're a king, where's your army? Aren't they going to come and rescue you?" Listen, you and I can't ever say, "My load is too big to ever forgive. It's beyond grace, beyond forgiving. It's too much." Jesus went through this ordeal, this marathon of 7 soul-shredding attacks, every single one of them unjustified. And yet, he forgave the people involved right at that very moment. While the nails were going in, while the spit was hitting his face, while the taunts were ringing in his ears. Vera Sinton concludes this list of 7 and writes, Jesus, God's Son, is the only sinless person who has ever lived. While all these things were happening to Jesus, he was loving the people involved, offering friendship to the one who betrayed him, warning his companions of danger ahead. He gently challenged the governor who sentenced him. He openly prayed for the soldiers who nailed his hands and feet to a cross. And how? How did Jesus live up to his own words about forgiving 7 times and even 70 times 7? How did he not only not nurse a grudge, he didn't even let one begin. He was forgiving as the sins happened. Well, we're here in Luke 23. If the challenge is there, maybe the answer is too. And sure enough, just go down 9 verses, and there it is, verse 46. Jesus called loudly, "Father, I place my life in your hands." Whether you're the relatives of Matthew Shepard, or Coretta Scott King, or just someone whose co-workers have ripped you off at the office, those 8 words can really spell the end of our inner torment. Father, I place my life in your hands. Father, I give it all to you.